When I talk to people about free will, one question that I hear very often is, why does it matter? Why does it matter whether or not we have free will? Because at the end of the day, we all feel as if our actions are made freely, and that feeling won't go away anytime soon, so why should we care about free will? And to that question, some people just answer, well, free will might just be a very interesting topic to talk about and nothing more. For instance, here's Alex O'Connor saying just that.
Alex O'Connor, in 1 minute, why does this matter? Why does whether we're free or determined matter for our everyday lives? Why is it not just a philosophical thing that we can argue about till the cows come home?
Well, it might just be that. There are lots of things that are worth arguing about. You know, do numbers actually exist? Are numbers real things, or are they just like human constructs? Like, it's pretty useful. I mean, who cares, man? Like, whatever. But it's interesting. It's fun. It's fun to think about. You know, how many prime numbers are there? Again, like, you know, it's not really got that much practical import, but it's interesting to think about. So there's that. Of course, it is worth bearing in mind that on a sort of practical level, if somebody wrongs you or does something bad to you, if you can remind yourself that they might not have had control over the determining factors that made them do that, it might make you into a more charitable and kind person.
Now, for me personally, I think that free will is extremely important to talk about because it has huge implications on how society is structured and how we treat people. So in this video, we will talk about the main differences between a world without free will and a world with free will. So let's first talk about the definition I'll be using for free will, because this is usually where the disagreements start. Now, the definition I'll be using is one for libertarian free will, and it goes like this. So it says here, libertarianism holds onto a concept of free will that requires the agent to be able to take more than one possible course of action under a given set of circumstances. Now, if you did not understand what that meant, let me explain it to you in a simpler manner using my iPad. So imagine there was event A, event B, event C, event D, and event E. Now, in a deterministic world, in a determined universe, you would expect the following event, the next event, to be event F right here. But in a world with libertarian free will, someone could, despite the previous events, choose to do, for example, event K or action G. And that's what it means when it says that under a given set of circumstances, an agent could take more than one possible course of actions. So he could say, okay, well, I'll do event K or G instead of F. Now, the people that I talk with that believe in free will say that obviously event A, B, C, D, E will influence the following action here. But at the end of the day, you can always choose to do something else. So probabilistically, you might be more likely to do event F, but you could always choose, if you use your free will properly, to do event G or K or L or any other events. So this will be the definition I'll be using for this video. Now, I don't believe that this kind of free will exists, but the reasons why are outside the scope of this video. If you want a video explicitly on the reasons why I believe free will doesn't exist, you can let me know in the comments down below. So the first difference between a world with free will and a world without free will is something that philosophers call basic desert. Now, this word desert is spelled like desert, but it's pronounced like dessert because it's a word, an old English word that means like to deserve something. But philosophers, they like to use that word even if we don't really use it in our common parlance. Now, to deserve something like praise or punishment in the basic sense, it means that you deserve it not because of any like consequentialist calculations or any practical reasons, but because of the actions themselves. So for instance, if you do a good deed, while some people might praise you because you've done a good deed, not because in the future you might be more likely to do more good deeds if we praise you. They will praise you just for the sheer fact that you've done it. Same thing for punishment. For instance, if I put you in solitary confinement because you've done something good, now solitary confinement will probably not make you a better person. It will probably not deter you from committing more crimes in the future, but at least we've balanced the scale of morality or the scale of karma because you've truly deserve it in the basic sense. So some free will skeptics say that you need free will in order to have basic desert, and you need basic desert in order to be morally responsible for your actions. And so any world without free will, you would not be morally responsible for their actions. So the first implication of having no basic desert is that rich or poor, successful or not, you did not deserve it. Because if, for instance, we were to simulate the entire universe and then play back your life, you would do the exact same decisions and you would end up at the exact same place. Obviously, if we don't take into account quantum randomness. If there's no quantum randomness, you would do the exact same thing. And so the reasons why you became rich or successful is not because you've used your free will better than someone else. It's just because of the mix of your genes plus your environment. You mix that together and it created you. Now, in a world with free will, you would have basic desert. So that means that even if there's external circumstances that might make it harder or easier for you to be successful or rich, at the end of the day, you can always choose actions that will make you more likely to become successful. And some people who believe in free will might point to, for example, rich people that have become poor and poor people that have become rich. And they might say even people with bad environments are able to get out of their situation because they're able to use their free will better than other people. Now let's go back to a world without free will. Does that mean that in this world we would all need to be communists and share our resources equally? Because at the end of the day, if you make more resources than someone, if you're more successful than someone, you did not deserve it, and therefore you should share it equally to your fellow comrades. Well, although this would be communism would be the simplest way, the easiest way to solve this contradiction, you can still justify inequality even in a world without free will. For instance, in a book called A Theory of Justice, John Rawls explains how you can justify inequality and also taxation even in a world where you don't choose where in society you're born in. Now the way he's able to justify it is by using a hypothetical situation he calls the original position. Let me explain. So to imagine the original position, you need to imagine a time before the universe ever existed, and you're just souls floating around in nothingness, and you're deliberating about how could you structure society so that it's the most fair and the most just. And so one important thing of this original position is something John Rawls calls the veil of ignorance. And what it is that it's something that inhibits you or prohibits you from knowing the position, the body that you'll be born in when society is created. And it also prohibits you from understanding statistics. Now, the reason why the veil of ignorance is important is to prevent motivated reasoning, because if I know that I'll be born into a rich man's body, then I'll advocate for less taxes. But if I know that 99% of people in my society will be poor, then I'll probably advocate for more taxes. So by putting a veil of ignorance, you limit the motivated reasoning, and you're sure that your society that you create will be as fair as possible. Now, to simplify the original position, let's just say that there's only two souls that are deliberating. Now, there's one soul, two souls like this, and let's say that this is me, this is you, and we're deliberating about how should we share the wealth in our new society. Now, in this position, I have as much chance of being rich than I have of being poor, and it's the same thing for you. And so I might say, well, if I'm poor, I want you to give me 50% of your income so that we are fair. And in exchange, if I'm rich, I'll give you 50%. So we agree, yeah, that sounds good, 50%, 50%. And so in this society, let's say that I'm rich and I make $1,000 and you make $0. Okay? And so I share 50%, I give you $500 to you, and we both end up with the same thing. Now we think about it for a bit more time, and then we say, okay, well, what if, reducing the tax burden of the rich person increases the amount of money he makes, and it increases the size of the pie? In that case, if that inequality benefits everyone, well, I think it would be justified. For instance, if we lower the tax burden of the rich person to 40%, well, let's say I'm the rich person and I make $2,000 in that society. Well, even if I end up after taxes with $1,200 and you only end up with $800, you still have $300 more than you would had we just split it 50-50. So you end up with the rule that, okay, inequalities are justified as long as it benefits everyone. So in a world without free will, you don't have to be communist. It's just that you need to justify every inequalities you have, and it needs to benefit everyone. Now, the second implication of not having basic desert is also that criminals are not morally responsible for their actions. And that's really important, because right now most justice system in most countries rely on free will as its foundation. For instance, here in United States versus Grayson in 1978, the Supreme Court says a deterministic view of human conduct is inconsistent with the underlying precepts of our criminal justice system. And also, if we go in 1952, there's also an example in the Supreme Court with Morissette versus the United States that says it is as universal and persistent in mature systems of law as belief in freedom of the human will and a consequent ability and duty of the normal individual to choose between good and evil. And so if there's no free will, if there's no basic desert, well, you'll probably need to change how the foundation of those justice system. But in a world with free will, obviously you can just keep the status quo, because free will is the foundation of those systems. Now, does that mean that in a world without free will, since criminals are not morally responsible, they can just do whatever they want without being punished, and they can just, steal and steal again and again, and we'll never have any justification for putting them in prison, because at the end of the day, they are not responsible? Not quite. Again, you can still justify putting people in prison even if they don't have free will, and one of the ways to do that is the quarantine model of justice. Now, I won't talk about the merits of this quarantine model. I'll just explain how it works and what is the justification that they give for imprisoning people. But if you want a video about the merits of this model, let me know in the comments down below. So, the quarantine model of justice, the way it justifies putting people in prison is by saying, well, people that are carriers of very dangerous diseases, we feel that it's justified to put them in quarantine because they are a danger to others. So we use self-defense of yourself and others as a justification to remove their freedom, even if they're not, responsible for catching that disease. And it's the same thing for criminals. We would say, okay, well, even if you're not responsible for your crimes, you're still a danger to society, and therefore we are justified in putting you in prison until you are no longer a threat to society. Now, this might sound like our current justice system, but with added steps, but there's a lot of differences. For instance, you cannot punish people for punishment's sake. You need a very, very good justification to punish them, and you need to prioritize something other than punishment before even considering punishment. So for instance, you need to prioritize rehabilitation, and if that doesn't work, then perhaps if you have very good justification, then you can punish them. Also, you would not be able to put prisoners in very, very disgusting conditions. You would need to give them a somewhat comfortable environment. Just like, for example, if I put you in quarantine because you are a carrier of a very dangerous and infectious disease, I will not just give you like a metal bed just to make you suffer more than you need to, because you're not really responsible for catching that disease. Now, let's summarize what we've talked about so far. So in a world with free will, it would be like the status quo that we have right now. So rich or poor, you kind of deserve it. There's still some external influences that are outside of your control, but at the end of the day, you are the one making the decision. And also, criminals are morally responsible, like the justice system we have right now. In a world without free will, rich or poor, you wouldn't deserve it, because you're not responsible for your actions, and also criminals are not morally responsible. Now, the third difference, and the most important to me, between a world with free will and a world without free will, and the reason why I think on a societal level we should get rid of free will as a concept, is the fact that if we go back to this causal chain A, B, C, D, E, if there's no free will and the world is determined, you could trace back all the causes for action F. But in a world with libertarian free will, that wouldn't work, because even if probabilistically A, B, C, D, E might influence your actions, you can still choose to do something else. You can still choose to do action G, and that means that trying to trace back the causes of an action is way less useful. So to me, this is very important, because if we believe that free will doesn't exist, well, it might make us more curious about the causes of someone's action. Because, for instance, let's say that A, B, C, D, E causes the action F, and action F is, I don't know, robbing a bank, rob a bank. And then you have causes like here, bad schools, and you have bad upbringing right here. While you could very confidently say that probably if we remove one of them, that might prevent action F, event F, from ever happening. Or if we remove more than one, A and D, then that might cause some other event to happen, hopefully a better event. So for example, it might be event K instead, and K is giving to charity. And that's why in a video that I made called When We Stop Blaming / Punishing Individuals, Less People Die, the link will be in the description down below. I talk about when we become more curious about the causes of an event instead of just blaming the individual, less people end up dying. For instance, one example that I give is the example of factories. From 1907 to 1939, there was a reduction of about 90% in factory injuries. And before that, when they blamed the workers for their own injuries, well, as you can see here, this is the death calendar in industry for Allegheny County. And here you can see 35, 45 death, 37 death, 35, 54, and every X means one death. So here 60, 36, 43. When the factories stopped blaming the individuals and instead blamed the work environment, well, less people ended up dying. And that's also one of the reasons why commercial flights had become safer than ever. One of the reasons is obviously better technology, but the other reason is because we stopped blaming the controllers for their mistakes. So the commercial aviation safety team basically said, okay, we'll stop blaming the controllers because we want to figure out how to prevent those mistakes from happening ever again. And if we blame them, they won't tell us the reasons why they made those actions. Instead, they'll hide it. So when they stopped blaming them, they were able to get more information and prevent those mistakes from happening. And it's also happening in medicine, where more and more places, more and more hospitals are using a systems approach to solve problems instead of an individual's approach to solve problem. Because in the past, we used to blame the nurses and the doctors for their mistakes. So for example, if you kill someone by injecting the wrong substance into your patient, then that's your fault. But now with the systems approach, instead of blaming the nurse or the doctor, instead we blame the environment and we say, how can we prevent this from happening? And oftentimes the answer is just, well, let's just remove it from their tray so that they don't ever make that mistake again, and so less people die. So these were the three main differences between a world with free will and a world without free will. Now, the last thing I'd like to talk about is a question that a lot of people ask me, and I feel like it's just a lack of imagination. And that question is, can you make progress without free will? And of course, you can make progress without free will because you are just a product of natural selection. You are the product of thousands of species that have been able to survive and adapt their environment. So of course, you can make progress without free will. And one example that I can give you is a genetic algorithm that basically simulates natural selection. So here, as you can see on the screen, there are red squares, and the red squares, how they are programmed is that the ones that are able to get the closest to the end zone will get to reproduce, and the ones that are not able to get close enough to the end zone will not be able to reproduce. And eventually they change their behavior, they change their tactic, they change, I guess, their thinking, and eventually they're able to make progress. And after like 102 generations, as you can see, the little red square is able to reach the end. Now, that is it for this video. If you have any thoughts or any questions about free will that you have for me, let me know in the comments down below. Thank you for watching, and bye-bye.